All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Just Ask Julia and her team. I'm Liz Helton, and today I'll be leading our session on job search strategies, how to read job descriptions and determine if a role is right for you. If you're watching us live today, following our session, you'll be able to ask all of your career-related questions, whether it's about job descriptions or anything else in your job search that is stumping you or just aimed to pick our brain this morning. If you're catching us on the replay through our YouTube channel, you can sign up through the link in the description below to catch a future live session and ask your own questions. So without further ado, let's talk about job descriptions, because we often get questions about what job descriptions actually mean. Or I hear so frequently from people about like, well, I just submitted for a bunch of roles and I'm not hearing anything back. And more often than not, it's because we aren't effectively digging into the job description and really understanding what is being asked of the applicant. So first and foremost, understanding kind of the mechanics of a job description is really important. Every single job description will obviously have a title and the company name and kind of, well, I'll get to that. Not always the company name. The job title first and foremost, and kind of an overview of maybe the type of company, or in most cases, the company itself. If you're working with a recruiter, if it's been posted by a third party, oftentimes you will see that company overview kind of watered down to just like the industry or Fortune 500 company or burgeoning startup, or whatever it is, because they want to be able to have an initial conversation with you before they give you all the details of the actual company. So once you get through kind of the overview of what the company is about, you start to get into the roles, responsibilities, of the nuts and bolts of the job itself. You'll also usually see something in there about the qualities of the individual, sometimes the soft skills. It's really great when you're starting to see them shape a whole person around what they're looking for in a role. Then we get into, of course, the requirements. And in best case scenario, you're going to start to get a feel for what are the benefits? What are you going to get out of this role? And in some states, I believe it is up to almost 15 states now, I believe, salary requirements. So these are kind of typical things that you're going to see throughout job descriptions across the board. What are the biggest missteps when you're reading job descriptions? First and foremost is not knowing what you want in a job. Right? If you're blindly going after a multitude of different types of jobs, that's going to make it really hard to kind of figure out, is this role right for you? The entire interview process from the moment you hit submit stops really being about you and more about the role itself and how you're a fit for it. So we always advise people to do is to start by knowing what your priorities are. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to uncover that in the job description in just a little bit. Probably the biggest thing that you cannot do is read the job description fully. As I mentioned before, we frequently hear from people who will skim through job descriptions, and it's really easy if you're applying to several jobs a day to sit there and kind of just like, oh, this looks just like the last one. I'll use the same language. I'll just change a couple things around and off we go. But there's often hidden little gems within the job description that you'll miss if you're not reading it from top to bottom. Red flags. There are oftentimes some very specific red flags in job descriptions that will pop up that you need to know about. Some of the biggest red flags that we see are vague job descriptions, things that don't tell you a lot about much of anything within the role. If you kind of just get a sense of like, they haven't really put a ton into this, they just kind of put something very general together, that oftentimes is going to tell you they haven't really thought fully about the role. Or the reverse of that, too many requirements. If you have so many requirements in a job description, you start to say, well, what am I not doing? That's often a red flag that maybe they're understaffed and this role is going to be way bigger than any one person could handle, or that it's a little bit scattered and they haven't thought through what that role is really all about. Crazy earning potential. If a job description is promising you the ability to like 10x your career in a short amount of time, or unlimited earning potential, that is often a red flag that the role is more about smile and dial or guerrilla marketing, and something that is maybe more focused in false promises to their pool of candidates and that they're trying to get as many candidates as they can at one time. So you really want to be able to get a good balance of what they're asking of you and what they can give you in return. You really want to see, first and foremost, a nice balance of what the company needs and what the company can offer. And then finally is that the biggest mistake you could probably make, apart from not reading it, is not taking what you have read and adjusting your application for that role. As the resume writer at Holy & Associates, I would say 90% of the people I talk to send out the same resume over and over again for every role they apply to when we first start working together. And that is a giant misstep, because your resume is a marketing tool that is meant to meet a very specific audience. And so if you're sending out the same document over and over again, it's doing a fine job of saying what you've done in the past, but maybe not answering the question of why you're the right candidate for the job. And this all starts with really knowing what's going on in that job description. So the next thing that we often hear, what's required versus what's just desired, right? And making sense of kind of what the job description's wish lists really are. And that's truly what a job description is. We're going to talk about how to break down a job description in just a moment. But what I can tell you first and foremost is that a job description is a wish list. It has been put together by a person or a group of people that have some expectations or perceptions around what the person is that is going to be the right candidate for that job. Maybe it's what the person who had the job before had. Maybe it's the skills and qualifications that are missing from their team currently. What I can tell you, though, is that most qualified applicants for the job don't have 100% of the things on the wish list. And if they do, they're probably overqualified or going to be bored in a position that they could probably be doing more with. So you want to be looking for the key words within the job description that are going to say things like, is this something that is preferred? Is this something that is absolutely necessary, right? And so we're going to look at a specific job description in just a little bit and kind of break down what might be required and what keywords pop out in just a moment. Years of experience is one that I always look at, and people will just tense up about and say, I can't apply for this. I don't have that number, because numbers pop out on a page. And so oftentimes when people say, oh, I don't have 10 years of experience of doing this, I have 7. Well, we want to say, okay, well, what does your experience equate to? Does your experience equate to what they're thinking somebody has in that number? That number is truly just a number. And it's more to gauge ballpark, if you will, when it comes to years of experience. Team leadership. If it's asking that you have had experience leading a team or building a team, that might be something that they really find important and really are needing somebody who you can see like, oh, I am going to be responsible for the oversight of individual contributors or oversight of managers that have individual contributors, depending on where you're at in your career. But it's going to be important to see what words are being used around this, right? If it's something that like, do you have the capability to lead the team, or do they need somebody who has demonstrated experience building a team from the ground up and really seeing and thinking to yourself, well, what's the nuance here? Is this something that I'm going to have to really know how to do on the fly, or am I going to be able to kind of stretch my wings and be able to do a little bit more? Certifications and credentials often fall into that required category. It's really going to depend on what the certification is. I still encourage, if somebody has all of the qualifications, but maybe their certification is in process or something that they could get pretty easily, to still apply and to talk to the hiring managers and say, I know that there's a certification course coming up that I am happy to apply to target. This is something that I can get pretty easily. For the right candidate, for the right chemistry, sometimes you can bend on what you need, right? It depends on where you're at in your career, and it's going to depend on what that certain certification really is. Degree or comparable experience. This one is where I always look and say, okay, well, what's the job, right? If you are going after a role in sales or customer success, sometimes you'll still see a degree requirement, but oftentimes those jobs are really about who you are as a person and your ability to close a sale. Now, if the job is something in biotech and it's asking for a PhD in biotech, it's probably going to be something that you actually really need to be able to do that very technical work. And lastly, languages. If you're going after a job that is asking you to translate into, formal technical Spanish, for instance, and you have, remedial conversational, that's probably something that is going to be a deal breaker for the company. So looking at language requirements and asking, is that something that is going to inhibit my ability to do the job? Or is it something that is just a nice to have that would help me do the job a little bit easier? So really kind of looking around the nuance of what is around these qualifications and requirements is going to tell you, is this something that is required of me, or is it something that is going to help enhance my capability? All right, let's talk about actually breaking down job descriptions. This is probably one of my favorite exercises that we do with the individuals that we work with, because it really forces us to take the job description and go line by line to understand what is being asked, what is being offered, and how you align, right? And I always like to think of this as a little bit of a game of red light, green light, because what you're going to do is you're going to highlight a job description into 3 categories. It's actually 4, but I'm going to get to the bonus one at the end. First and foremost, you are going to go through the job description, pull it into a Word document. Side note, if you are not pulling your job descriptions into an editable form, start doing that immediately. You take nothing else from what I say today. Pulling your job descriptions into some sort of editable form is going to help you keep a record of it in case that job description gets pulled off a website. I've seen the scenario play out where somebody gets called months after they've submitted for a role and they can't find the job description anymore. So keeping a record for yourself of what the words in the job description are is really important. It's also going to help with this exercise. So first and foremost, you're going to take that Google Doc, Word doc, whatever document, and highlight out anything from top to bottom in that job description that you are an absolute rock star. You're going to highlight that out in green. These are going to be things like the work that you have done over and over. You have that particular skill and you embody this 100%. You know that this is something that is going to be very easily demonstrated in your resume. The second category is yellow. Yellow are the things that you maybe have some exposure to or comparable experience, something that is maybe you did earlier in your career, but it's been a minute, it's been a while. But it's not necessarily as much of a slam dunk as those rock star characteristics. And then last but not least is red. Red are the things that you just plain and simple don't have. As confident as you are about the greens, you also are pretty certain you do not have the red. It could be that certification that maybe you don't have. Maybe they're asking for 4 languages and you only know 2. But it's very cut and dry that you know that this is a gap on your resume. Side note, when you see yellow and red, don't run. Don't panic, because like I said before, job descriptions are wish lists. Everybody is going to have some level of blend of these different colors. Now, if it's all yellow and red, that's where you want to kind of take a step back and say, all right, this is an aspirational role. And these skills, the yellows and the reds, are the ones I need to be looking for to do in my next job, so that I can be ready for this role in the future. Looking for instance, this is kind of how this can all go. Now you'll see here that some of the bullets are all green and some of them have kind of a combination, and that's totally great. This is a role for, I believe, an HR manager, right? And I did just jump to the qualifications piece for this to show you kind of how we can break this down a little bit. As you'll see here, this person slam dunk, no problem, has an HR bachelor's degree. This individual has their SPHR or PHR. They have the years of experience, but they don't have the 2 years experience in a supervisory role. Okay. They know of the federal employment laws, but they're coming from out of state, so they don't have California just yet. But they do have some exposure to leaves of absence, ADA, etc. They've had some exposure to matrix structures. They don't consider themselves to have quote unquote prior experience. And I'll show you kind of where that is, how that plays out in the broader picture in the next slide. They believe they have strong interpersonal skills. and but maybe haven't had the ability or the exposure to interact with the highest levels of the organization or that size of an organization. And then so on, and down at the bottom, you'll see they're not bilingual. But overall, this is a pretty solid qualification. Like I said before, we're not going to let that yellow and red get you down, because when you look at this from top to bottom, this individual is pretty well qualified for the role. Now, if I were to look at this though, and this role was all about translating, and we saw right at the bottom that they were not bilingual, that one red is a pretty, there's, not all reds are created equal, if you will. But in this case, I don't believe that that's what this role was about. So it's not, necessarily the end all be all. You really want to look at, in terms of the requirements, what are the things that are going to be the most impactful to the roles and responsibilities, and kind of comparing how those align. Now, I did promise you a fourth category. Our bonus category is blue. And what I recommend you do after you do your greens, your yellows, and your reds is to go back through and highlight or change the text color. I like changing the text color so you can still see your green, yellows, and reds. Highlight anything in that job description that maybe you can do, maybe you can't do, but you don't want to do it. These blues are going to demonstrate that they don't align with your priorities, right? When I said don't run for the hills when you start to see yellow and red, if you start seeing too much blue, that's when you might want to say, I can do this job, but I really don't want to. Once you've taken a look at all of this, how do we really take it a step further? The thing I love about this exercise is that while it starts with, just deciding if the role is, right for you to apply to, it gets to be what you use to update your resume. It gets to be what you look at those greens and those yellows and say, okay, I know these are the examples I need to have in my resume and the language I need to be using. These are the examples that are showing us, okay, the key terms that they are asking. Let's flip back here, actually, that they are looking for individuals that, can manage a new hiring process. It's a pretty strong keyword for an HR manager role. Update job descriptions, new hire documentation, knowing what the words that are being used in the job description are going to be pretty powerful for aligning that resume. And we have full Just Ask Julia sessions around aligning the resume portion of this, and I could probably talk for a whole hour on just that portion. But know that this exercise can help you really look at your resume and say, am I saying the right thing? And then when it comes to the interview, this becomes your study guide. This becomes what you say, okay, I know I need to position these yellows in a way that's going to help me align with this job, right? And I know that when a red comes up, I'm going to need to be able to speak to that, right? So beyond that, taking it a step further, knowing the tone of the job description is really important. Is this a job description that is using really exciting and engaging tone? That's going to tell you a little bit about that company's tone and the way that maybe you approach your cover letters. And then you can also start to look for decision makers. I always love when a job description says, you report to the director of global sales, because then that gives you the opportunity to go find that director of global sales at that company and make an introduction, trying to find a real person, right? Also, if it's showing, for those of you who have LinkedIn Premium, it'll oftentimes show you who the person who has posted it is, so you can reach out to that person directly as well. And really kind of taking that next step to be able to look at how you're networking your way into a role, which again, an entire session on that easily. And then kind of wrapping this up, I did mention, knowing those key points. What are the things that you need to be utilizing from the moment you decide I want to apply for this job through the end, where you say, this is how I'm going to evaluate the opportunity from any other opportunity I may be considering, and then studying for those interviews and knowing really what is going to be expected of you. So that is doing it for today's presentation. Again, I'm Liz Hilton. If you're watching the replay of this, click the link in our description to sign up for a future Just Ask Julia session. For those of you watching us live, we are going to open it up now for our questions. Thanks for joining us today.